Welcome, everybody. This is Scott Gikden with Pro Wrestling Logic, and today we are going to do the first of our interview series that is current. For those that are new to the channel, there's about 10 or 11 audios from an earlier podcast that I used to do, but we are starting an interview series with local and national independent talent from all over the U.S., all over North America. Certainly looking forward to doing that. If you'd like to be interviewed, certainly we would love to be in contact with you. Contact through DM through either Twitter at PO Perception, or you can also contact through YouTube as well. Today, Logan Creed is with us. This guy he's enormous for one. He in a land of what has been smaller guys, he's a giant. Signed with MLW recently, and if you're sleeping on MLW, you need to watch that. I know I saw Court Bauer on social media earlier say that their television network is running marathons of the programming, so you might want to check that out since we're all on lockdown anyway. Certainly a good thing to do with the time. In any event, Logan, are you with us?
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for taking time out of what is, I'm sure, a super busy schedule. Give our listeners a little bit of your background and what got you into professional wrestling.
So as far as professional wrestling goes, I've been doing it since the early 2000s. I got started when I was in college, and it was kind of hit and miss for many years. Obviously, I was focused on graduating from school, so I wasn't really involved and dedicated to it early on, and at the time it was just kind of a different time in wrestling, so getting out there was a process in itself. You had to have connections, you had to kind of know people to get to the next place or the next level, and it wasn't social media. We didn't have Facebook and things like that to help us, so it was a long time before I really became dedicated, I guess you could say, to pursuing this as a career. It was always kind of just a hobby, for a long time. And but after college and after years of kind of bouncing back and forth and getting back into it and then kind of stepping away, I made the decision, to run headlong. I knew it was what I wanted to do. I knew it was what I should be doing, and I knew that as long as I wasn't giving all of it, all of me to it, that I wasn't going to be satisfied. So, and once I did that, I really saw myself begin to elevate through the ranks of it.
All right. And so you mentioned getting started in the early 2000s. For those fans who probably weren't even born yet, tell us about the major differences in the independent scene, let's say 15, 20 years ago versus now.
Yeah, it's changed so much in the way people are trained. There's the training schools now are so much better than then. You showed up to whatever show was closest to you, and that was where you trained, and you hoped that whoever was there doing that training was somebody that should be doing it, and in a lot of cases it wasn't. So I remember, so many stories from guys who would pay for training, and it was just a ridiculous amount of money, and they weren't getting really trained at all. And so it was hard, and like I said, if you didn't know how to get into the business, then it wasn't like you could just go online and find a school, because they weren't really being publicized like that. So it was just different, a different type of training. Today's wrestling is completely different than it was then. But it's cool because I think I come in right at the time that it was beginning to transition. And so where I had a lot of the old school mentality training, I was seeing guys, developing Wildside. NWA Wildside was probably the big name promotion in the state of Georgia at the time, and we could watch it at home. And so you could see guys like AJ Styles and that were coming up from there, and that's where they started. And you could see what they were doing, and you knew that it was evolving.
And that was Bill Barron's thing back in the early 2000s, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
In that area of the country, he was such an influential person that there were guys, and I came originally from the New England circuit, and there were guys in the New England circuit that would make going to NWA Wildside destination booking at the time. This is in the early days of what's now Impact, and was then TNA. And going to Wildside was a way to get seen by the TNA people. And I don't think that today's men and women in the business quite understand how much more difficult it was, and in terms of getting noticed. You had to send tape out, you had to get on an actual phone with promoters. Now you can send a YouTube link and you book by the end of the day, but it wasn't always that way.
Right, exactly. And and the cool thing about Bill Barron is that he's still such a figurehead in the state of Georgia. I've had the opportunity to work for him. I've worked with him. He was my manager for a brief time at a promotion in North Georgia, and so it's been really cool to kind of sit under that learning tree and listen and learn from him and hear the stories, from Wildside and the time that he was in the business, running that. So it's just really cool to be able to work with him and know him as a friend and a mentor.
So take us through, you decide you want to get into wrestling. I assume you were a fan first. Do you have a first wrestling memory that sticks out?
I've talked about this on a couple of different podcasts, but the first memory I have of wrestling is with my grandfather. He was, in a small community at the time when NWA was the thing in the South. I remember that people would gather at my grandparents' house to watch the big events, the Starcades and things like that. And Thanksgiving was it was more than just family. It was more than just Thanksgiving. It was wrestling. We knew that was when wrestling was going to be on. So that was my earliest memories, is just seeing the entire community gather at my grandparents' house to watch NWA. And so that was my first experience, and that's really when I fell in love with it. And I remember for years, every time I would go to their house, he would just have tapes recorded of anything that had come on, and I would sit and watch it for hours and hours and hours. It would just, and even if I wasn't watching it, it was on in the background.
Who was the first guy that made you go, I want to be like that guy?
It was definitely Sting. That was the guy when I was a kid. And what's fun is as I got older and realized that I was going to be a big kid or big guy, I started kind of falling in love with Vader and Undertaker and those guys that I kind of related to. But definitely as a child, Sting was the guy that I wanted to see and that I idolized.
All right. And so you mentioned earlier going to a school in the early 2000s. What was the hardest part of training when you first got to a school? Was it the calisthenics drills? Was it the psychology? What was the most difficult thing for you?
Where I trained, I would probably say the most difficult thing was just at first it was definitely the bumps. It wasn't the best ring in the world. It was pretty brutal. So, and it was just hours of literally just bumping over and over again. And I wouldn't say that I was learning much psychology at the time, if any at all. Unfortunately, I was probably in that category of, I was in one of those places where I was being trained by somebody that probably shouldn't have been training people. But, thankfully, as I always knew that I had to learn more, and I knew inside that I needed to learn more as I went out. And so I was always asking questions, and if I saw someone that I knew got it in the ring, I would always try to ask them for help, after the match or after the show, or ask them for advice. But yeah, no, definitely just at the hours of just literally taking bumps over and over and over again. It was tough. I remember those first couple of days, I didn't want to go back, but I knew I had to go back because the desire to do it was so much more powerful than the pain that I felt.
And I think you had another disadvantage, at least I can imagine it being a disadvantage, and that is you're a bigger guy. So for people that haven't seen you, give us a physical description so people can get a mental image of what you look like now and what you looked like then, and then I'll complete my question.
So at the time when I started wrestling, I went to college to play football. So when I went to college to play football, I was about 315 pounds. I was 6'5", graduating high school. When I got to college, I decided football really wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I quit, and immediately I probably gained 30 pounds. So I was about 350, not very muscular. I was offensive lineman, and transferred to another college, and that's when I got into the training. And so, at the time, I was not in any type of shape. So it was definitely a disadvantage. Plus, I'm, 6'8" at this point. And so, yeah, it was, doing some of the things was a little difficult. And, they were expecting me to do them. But, that kind of motivated me to get into shape. And after about a year, I had lost 130 pounds, and the college that I was in was starting a wrestling team. And I was approached by the coach to wrestle for the team. So I actually that was the first time I stepped away from professional wrestling because I was then wrestling in college. But, that whole thing kind of pointed me in the right direction. And I definitely think that collegiate wrestling helped with my professional wrestling in the long run. Because it taught me a good training regimen. It taught me, how to eat and how to maintain weight and how to maintain a look. So it was a blessing in disguise. And plus I got to wrestle at a collegiate level. So that was definitely cool experience. And
I would also assume that the collegiate experience taught you about need for cardiovascular training that came in very handy, I would bet, when you were doing like rope drills and run drills and all that in the professional training, no?
No, absolutely. And I fell in love with running. I really did. It was I enjoyed it so much. We had a 3-mile basically trail around campus. And every morning we would run it. And it got to the point where I was excited. I would even do it on my own sometimes when we didn't have to, just because I enjoyed it so much. But yeah, it definitely helped with the cardiovascular. But I will say, you always hear guys say it doesn't, nothing prepares you for a wrestling match other than just having a wrestling match. There's no amount of running I think you can do because of all the extra things that go into a match. You've got a crowd there. You're excited. Your adrenaline's pumping. These are all things you have to take in consideration because it's going to tire you out quicker if you aren't careful and you don't know how to handle it.
All right. And what I was coming to before and coming back around to now, you're 300 plus pounds. You're 6'8". In a time in the business when smaller guys became the norm, did you find it hard to be a bigger guy and perhaps set for, 1985 instead of 2005? Was it difficult to learn both the in-ring and the psychology of being a big guy, or did you have good mentors in that regard?
No, it was hard because I had nobody around me that could teach me, how to work like a big guy because everybody was the same size. So there was nobody there to kind of guide me on that. And for years, there was really nobody that guided me on how to work like a bigger guy, except for to tell me to never take a bump, and I hated the idea that I knew I was athletic. I knew what my ability was, but I was expected to almost be like a Frankenstein monster, walking around the ring. And so the idea of that really frustrated me for years because I knew I could do more and I knew I could be more, but the expectation and what was expected of me was the exact opposite. And so early on that was frustrating, and, that goes back to that old school mentality. And then, years later, I would meet people, Luke Gallows being someone that really was a mentor to me as far as how to work like a big guy and how to be a big man in the ring and still, still be able to move and do the things that you want to do. So it was a long road, but I got there, and, I figured it out along the way.
I'll tell a story because I think you'll get a kick out of it. I'm pretty sure our listeners will too. In the mid-2000s, I was affiliated with a local wrestling school, and we had a kid walk in one night, and he was about 6'3", 250, 60 pounds. Legit, he's pretty well stacked. So he's excited because this is like his third or fourth time in a ring, and he'd been doing the backyard thing that was so prevalent in the early 2000s. And he gets up, and he stands on the top rope, and he does a Jeff Hardy swanton. And so he's expecting the trainer to be, like, thrilled with this, right? Like, he's expecting, I'm this great athlete. And trainer looks at him and goes, "What'd you do that for?" Kid goes, "Because I can." Trainer nods, looks at him and says, "I can walk out that door, grab a hunting knife, and cut your hand off. Doesn't mean I should." In that moment, he learned a lot. He learned he'd walked into a very bizarre business, but he also learned it matters what you do and why you do it. And so I want to tie that together. You're coming out of a school for the first time. Was there a moment or two in the early portions of your career, those first few years, where you believed you were starting to get it, where things were starting to click, or did that take longer than you anticipated?
I think it took way longer than anticipated. It was, like I said, I didn't really have a guiding light or, a mentor. I was really just doing everything on my own, and it was frustrating. I knew that I wasn't where I wanted to be. I knew I wasn't as good as I wanted to be. I didn't have a clue how to get better because, it wasn't clicking, and it didn't matter how much I watched, wrestling or I didn't get it. And I didn't really have anybody telling me why I wasn't getting it. So it took a long time, and that's what I was saying. I would step away, I'd come back, I'd step away because I would come back and I'd be excited, but then after a year or so, I was like, this isn't what I wanted to do. This isn't where I want to be. I know I should be better than this, and if I'm not going to be the best at it, then I don't want to do it. So it was really frustrating. But when the decision was made that I was going to sell out and go all in, as I was just talking about Luke, it just so happened that when I made that decision, literally probably 2 months later, I happened to be on a show with him, and he took it upon himself when he saw me to come to me, and he helped me make some of the connections that I had never been able to make outside of the state, and really help teach me how to do that, how to reach out, how to get, how to reach out to these promoters and get bookings. And then in the process, I started working with better talent and being around better talent. And then I learned from watching and being around them.
What's the biggest mistake you see young people make today when it comes to trying to get bookings, and they think they're putting themselves ahead, and they're actually digging themselves their own hole and stepping both feet in the grave?
I think the one thing I see with the younger guys now, and I try to tell them, is impatience. Everybody, so many of them are trained, and once they're trained and they start wrestling, then they're waiting on a contract. And in 4 or 5 months, they haven't got one. they literally are frustrated and mad because they think they should be signed with a major company. And I'm quick to say, hey, look, I've been doing this for 10 plus years, and you didn't know who I was until 5 years ago. And so you have to be patient, and I'm quick to tell them too. You're ahead of me by leaps and bounds in just a short amount of time. So there's no point to be frustrated by it. You just have to continue to work and grow. It's not going to happen overnight. There's not enough spots available. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. There's not, and we're all trying to work to get to that point, hopefully. So it's just a matter of time, patience, continuing to work, staying positive about the work you're doing, and when the time's right, it'll happen.
I believe that life teaches us lessons, and I tell people all the time, and just opening up for those that are new, I run a life and business coaching business. It's what I've done for the last 13 years of my life, save for the year and a half, most recently when I was in a nursing facility because my health had crapped out on me. And I've worked with people all over the world, and I tell people all the time, the best education I ever got was being part of the pro wrestling business. I learned more about how to deal with people. I learned more about how to think on my feet than I ever would in a traditional classroom, be it college or high school or whatever have you. Talk a little bit about some of the life lessons that you learned through your involvement with the sport.
Oh, man. Well, I majored in psychology in college. So, right out of the gates, it was very aware to me that wrestling was more than just wrestling. In a business sense, we're salesmen, and the product is ourselves. And, we're trying to sell ourselves to these promoters, to these shows, and most of all to the fans. And I don't think people look at it that way enough because that's the reality of what it is. So, that was something very early on. And just like you said, I learned a lot about people. I learned how to deal with people. I learned a lot about business in the sense of how to handle business when you're talking to someone, when you're trying to get a booking, because it's just sales. There's no difference. When you reach out to a promoter, you're reaching out to a potential customer. Because that person's going to buy you. He's going to buy this product, and then he's going to sell this product to his audience. So
and it was so funny to me. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What's so funny to me is I teach clients in my coaching practice that all the time. You want to get a date, you have to sell yourself as the perfect person to date. You want to get a job, you've got to sell yourself as the perfect person for that position. You want to convince your kid that they need to do their homework, you have to sell yourself as an authority that, ultimately you know what you're talking about. Life is sales, and it's an uncomfortable thing. A lot of people don't like to hear that because it makes it a little less compassionate, a little less empathetic. But at the end of the day, every time you open your mouth and you're dealing with another person, you're selling something.
Right, and that's exactly the truth. And wrestling, when wrestling become my life, it has become my life. Even in my daily life, people often ask me, who is Logan Creed? Well, you're looking at him. Like there's nothing different about me except for a face paint when I walk out the curtain. Still the same exact person I am every single day of my life. My ideals do not change because that's who I am. And you have to just become it. You have to live it. It has to be everything that you do. Everything that you do from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep has to be about that business. And how can I sell myself to this business to get the most out of it?
And I said this earlier in an audio I was doing for my coaching channel, which for those that are listening to this, if you're into life advice, if you're into bettering yourself, check out Golden Opportunities Coaching. That's my parent company. We have a YouTube channel of the same name, and we do 15-minute audios every day on a positive topic. And I was talking to people today about in life, you got two choices. You can make history or you can make excuses. What are you going to do? But in order to make history, you have to be tunnel visioned on whatever your goal is, whether it's, making $1 million as a salesperson, breaking into wrestling, finding that perfect relationship, building a good relationship with your kids, your parents, your coworkers, whatever it is. You've got to be laser focused. You mentioned something that intrigues me because it's what made me pay attention to you when I came across you on Twitter, and then I searched you out because you looked interesting to me. But the face paint, obviously an homage to Sting, but where did it come from? Where did the design come from? What's the thought process behind the paint?
So as a kid, I was very shy and I was very, introverted. Which, if you knew me now as a person, you would think that was completely a lie, because I'm the exact opposite now. But the paint and the eyes and the entire look, that I created was the person that I saw inside of me during that time in my life when, I allowed myself to be a victim. And that was one of the things that held me back for so long, was viewing myself as a victim instead of the person that I knew I could be and that I was inside. And so, and there's so many things that cause those issues, but, that's that image and that persona that I put out is the person inside, reflecting out. And, that's the image of who I am, because, I am 6'10" and I am 300 pounds and I am an intimidating person, but I allow myself to be a victim because I didn't feel like I could use that strength and that power and that size against people. I thought I had to hold it back, and I allowed people to walk over me. So that's kind of what it is. It's it's like the inward pushing outward, more or less, and that intimidation factor of when you see that person walk out, there's not, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It makes people gasp.
You mentioned another thing, and that's connecting with kids. One of the things that I loved about being involved with the sport was just being able to watch a kid and they come alive. They find that larger-than-life star, even if it's at your local armory or your local high school. To them, they might as well be John Cena or Roman Reigns or Ric Flair or whomever, because your local stars, your independent stars, to them are the heroes of the day. Have you been able to affect the lives of any kids, or do you have any interesting fan interaction stories our listeners might benefit from hearing?
I do. There was kids have always been drawn to me, in not only in wrestling but life in general. There's been times where I've been in a store and a small child would literally wander away from their parents just to come stand and look up at me, just standing in awe, smiling. And they, of course, the parents turn around and realize they freak out. No, it's so there was a young girl at one of the shows, and she had actually had a lunchbox made with my picture on it, and she brought it to the show, and it was super awesome. I signed it for her, and then a few months later, she come to me, and she was in tears, and so she took the lunchbox to school, and some kids had taken it and thrown it, broke it, just bullying her, being mean. And so we haven't done it yet because this just happened recently, but I'm going to actually go to the school if when we get to have school again, and I'm going to go and have lunch with her, and so that's just something that I love that I have that effect, and it's something that she when I told her, I said, hey, I'm going to come have lunch with you at school, you could see that it completely made her world, that I would do that. and that I was going to come and people were going to see that I was there for her. So I love that. And I think if there's one thing that I want to do in this is just inspire kids, to just chase a dream, whatever that dream may be. It doesn't have to be wrestling. It can be whatever they want to do. I just want them to know that if they want it, that they can aspire to be anything they want to be.
And that's so amazing to me because, and for those that are new, you're hearing me for the first time through this venue on YouTube. You don't know that I have cerebral palsy. I'm wheelchair bound, and to be the first person in the New England region to do play-by-play for a dozen years while being chair-bound was a really interesting dichotomy, because all the time I'd hear from, the talents, oh, well, we'll make a way for you, you'll make it. And then I'd go to events, and these kids would come up to me, and they'd be like, you do that from there? And I'll never forget, I had this really cool experience, and I love it. We did an event at a local, like Boys and Girls Club or, inner city outreach facility for at-risk kids. And so we get to the intermission that night, and I'm sitting there, and I've got my clip-on tie and my dress shirt and pair of dress pants. And this kid, he's about 10, comes over, and he says, can you sign something for me? I said, okay, give me a pen. And so he comes back, and he brings me a pen, and I said, okay, what do you want me to sign? He goes, I don't know. I can't afford to get a picture. I go, okay, I don't care what you find. Go find a napkin, go find a plate, go find something, and I'll sign it for you. And so he goes away. He comes back about 3 minutes later, and he says, I can't find anything. And he takes off his shoe. So he says, can you sign my sneaker? All right. Strange request, but I'm down. So he goes back and sits with his buddies. There's about a dozen kids. They're between maybe 9 to 12 or something. And he's showing off his signed sneaker. Well, intermission hadn't ended yet. And we're sitting there, and about 5 minutes later, here comes the troop of all of them. Can you sign my shoes? And I'm just sitting there going, only in the pro wrestling industry could you sign a pair of a series of pairs of sneakers for at-risk kids, and you've made history for them. And for a lot of them, and you mentioned being bullied earlier, and I want to address that in just a second, but for a lot of these kids, having somebody that they had a DVD of, or they could point and say, this person's on internet television or conventional television, and they signed my shoe, maybe that helped them not get bullied. You know what I mean? Like, we as entertainers have this magnetic, awesome experience where we can influence the lives of these people long after the lights are off and the ring's torn down, and we don't even know it half the time.
No, absolutely. And I think that is definitely, one of the things that I get out of it the most is knowing that you never know what an individual, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily a kid. It could be an adult, the guy that brings his two boys to the show, he may not get to spend that much time with them. You don't ever know what people are going through. And so that moment that they're there and we're giving them something more than just wrestling. We're giving them a memory. We're giving them something to remember that time that they got to spend together. And it's a story that they'll go on to tell if you make it memorable for them.
So you mentioned having been bullied and victimized. If you don't mind, can you take us through that and how did wrestling give you an outlet away from that? Is that probably why you fell in love with it so much? Or what was that like, and how did that shape your life and the person you are today?
So as a kid, I dealt with sexual abuse from an aunt. that was kind of where the introvert and my shyness and inability to kind of stand up for myself started, because it was such a burden. Once I got old enough to realize what had happened, I wouldn't tell anybody, because I felt that shame, and I felt like you blame yourself even as a kid, and people you may wonder how does that work, but you do, and you really you grow up faster than any child ever should have to. But I carried that, and with carrying that, I didn't allow myself to stand up for myself. And so I would be the blunt, of jokes from even friends, because I just allowed that, just because I just wanted to feel a part of something. And wrestling was definitely an outlet watching it. But once I got into it, I knew it was my outlet, because when I started, I didn't have to be me. It was an opportunity to escape all of that and be something else and be somewhere else for those few moments. And eventually it allowed me to let that go and actually, tell the people in my family, my parents, others. It allowed me to finally get that burden out and not be ashamed, because the realization was it wasn't my fault. And I really feel like that's part of the connection that I have with kids, because I see them, and I see them differently. And it's such a weird thing to be able to say you can see someone and feel something from them without them ever saying a word. But I do, and it's just I think it's a gift in a way, because that gives me the ability to reach out to them and know that maybe I'm helping, and without knowing anything that's going on.
Giving them that outlet. And I can say everything I have done in my life, almost anyway, I can trace back to one person indirectly, and it's the late, great Bobby the Brain Heenan. As an abuse survivor myself, physical, mental, emotional, and sexual, wrestling was my outlet. That was my escape. And I knew, obviously being wheelchair-bound, I would never wrestle in a ring, but I always knew somehow, some way, someday I was going to do something with this business. And I latched on to Bobby at like 8 years old, and I thought, he's really funny. Maybe if I can learn to be that funny, people will leave me alone. And I remember thinking that as a kid. And I was blessed to get the opportunity to do play-by-play for the first time at 15 years old, and I thought I was really good. Years later, I found out I wasn't. And it's a heck of a journey to chase that dream for a dozen years, only to be told, hey, you're wheelchair-bound and that you're not quite enough for what we need at a national level. Sorry, you're good enough, but your physical limitations limit you. And that sprung me off into, okay, what do I do now? Because I've chased the dream and I didn't get it. And a mentor of mine, who I don't want to name drop, but someone who's been at the national level, said to me, he goes, hey, Scott, listen, for 2 years you whined and complained about how you never got your break, how it didn't happen for you. And I was bitter, I was miserable, I was hurt. I had thrown everything I had as a person into this thing, and it didn't pay off. And he said, maybe you're not meant to be the star. Maybe you're meant to be the carpenter to the stars and make stars in their own lives. And that was in 2007 that I had that conversation. And now all these years later, I've worked with 12,000 people in 40 countries. There's probably not a story I haven't heard. And I help people to change their lives. But I tell people the greatest thing that ever happened to me was losing my dream, because it allowed me to get another one. And it sounds like through your journey in the wrestling industry, you came close to your dream, you were in the ring, and then you stepped away. And you were in the ring, and then you stepped away. And sooner or later, you had to have that moment where you reinvigorated with the core of your dream and said, I'm going to do this no matter what happens. Tell us about that moment when you made that decision.
So at the time, it's so funny that you mentioned that like verbatim, because I don't think I've ever shared this story with anyone outside of just immediate family and friends. But at the time, I was running a bar, bartending and kind of running this place, working 7 days a week. I had completely stepped away from wrestling again, and it was just a really bad, dark time in my life. There was alcohol had become a daily part of my life. And I knew, I could feel it, but I was just drowning it all with the alcohol to keep from thinking about the fact that I knew I could be doing better. But it was Christmas Eve, and I don't remember the year exactly. It had to be probably 7 years ago now that I had come home. When I went to my parents' house, we were having Christmas the next day, and it was probably 4 a.m, and I just went to my parents' house that early. And I walked in and just went and laid on the couch, and my mom woke up and came in, and of course she's confused because here I am at her house at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she starts talking to me, and I literally just started crying. And we had one of those talks that we hadn't had in probably since I was a teenager, and I don't remember the verbiage exactly of the entire conversation, but I do remember that she asked me, she said, what do you want to do? And all I said was wrestling, like in tears. I just want to wrestle. And she said, so stop talking about it and just do it. She said, if that's really what you want to do, then stop talking about it and do it. And that moment, like, that was it. Like, it literally was just like the light bulb went off. It was like, that's the only way you're going to be happy. That's all you think about. It's all you. Anytime you do reflect on what it is you want to do with life, you may have a list of 20 ideas. That's always at the top. And that was when I really realized, I was like, okay, but that can't happen immediately. It's not like I can just leave here and go do that again. There's a process there. And I said, the first step was completely ridding myself of the situations and the things that were dragging me down around me. And so I picked up and moved to Florida. I was dating a girl at the time, and she had an opportunity there, and I said, yeah, let's go. I'll leave all this behind. Let's just go. And so I did. And, slowly but surely I started getting back into the ring. I started working out properly again, eating properly again. And, and I never let myself get discouraged. I just took every day as another step. And whether it was, making sure that I was in the gym, making sure that I was eating what I should eat. And, through my time in Florida, I met Brooklyn, who is now my wife, and she's also in the wrestling business. And, she would end up being the anchor, I guess, that I always needed. Because with her by my side, she saw something in me that I didn't even really see in myself yet. But she saw it. And she was so encouraging and always supportive of everything that I wanted to do, more supportive than anybody had ever been in my life. And every time she would support me, it would just ignite that fire, and it would just burn more and more and more. And probably sometimes she would burn too much because of that. But I'm so thankful even to this day, and she's still exactly the same way. She's so supportive of everything. And that was where I really took off, and it never looked back. And every step since then has been a steady growth to the point where I'm at now with MLW.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go next. Talk to us about how you got affiliated with MLW, for you, and then that moment when you got the contract. Take us through the emotions of that moment.
So it was, I guess, the end of 2018. I want to say at the time I would say I was like really hitting the peak, but like I've learned so much more and I've gotten so much better even since then. But I had started traveling and training with Austin Theory. If you're familiar with Austin, he was in NXT now, just had his debut match on Raw and is going to be in WrestleMania this weekend.
That kid is the future of the business. I'll go on record right now and say, if he's not main eventing WrestleMania in 5 years, I will shave my head and dye my head purple.
Listen, I will tell you that he will be, and I know this because he's another person, just like I just talked about Brooklyn, who when I met him, and just being around him is you can feel the energy and his persona and his just being next to him or around him or talking to him it's special. It really is, because he just oozes confidence and he knows exactly what he wants. He knows exactly where he's going, and literally no one or nothing can tell him otherwise. You could talk to him. You could tell him everything negative you wanted to say, and I promise you it has zero effect on him. Because
he's only, 22, 23, right?
He's 22 years old. So, but yeah, like at the time, we had met, we became friends, we were traveling, we were training together. And, I was at that point where, we knew that he was fixing to make that next jump. And, we would talk about, how I was going to get to the next jump. At the time, I had started wrestling for WWN, and I was, wrestling for FIP and doing their shows at the Mania weekend in New Orleans. And in my mind, Evolve was going to be where I wanted to go and follow kind of right in line with some of the guys from the Southeast who that's kind of like the destination spot. MLW, honestly, was, I knew what MLW was, but I didn't know anybody there. I knew no one in the company. But, December 2018, I started sending out emails. I was like, okay, it's time, it's time to make the next step. And so I started sending emails to major companies, getting my information out there, putting my resume out to, anything that I could find, I would send it, because what was the worst they could say? No. And I was like, I'm gonna take a shot. I'm getting older and something's got to happen, or either it's going to be too late. So I guess I sent MLW an email in December and didn't hear anything back. Went into 2019, continued working, started wrestling with PWX up in North Carolina, and was still working with FIP in Florida. I had done one of the Evolve tryouts, and they sent my information actually to the NXT, to the Performance Center for a possible tryout later. Didn't hear anything from that. So I guess it was end of April, 1st of August. I'm in the gym on a Saturday morning getting ready for a show that night, and I get a text. And it was from George Carroll Jr., who works for MLW. He's kind of a talent scout agent that works for them behind the scenes. And I got the text, and it was like, hey, it's George Carroll Jr. Are you talking to anybody right now about a contract? Answered no. And he said, well, would you be interested in talking with MLW? And obviously at first I thought it was a joke. I didn't know who George was, and literally thought somebody was probably just ribbing me. But he kept talking, and I was like, okay, maybe this is legit. And so a week later, I get an email, and I was actually in the middle of filming a movie from Mr. St. Laurent, and MSL, sends me the email and starts talking with me about the contract, and I I think we finally signed the deal in mid-September. So.
And and I'm my mouth is on the floor right now because you mentioned the name in George Carroll. Here's how small the wrestling business is. George originally is a New Englander, and I'm pretty sure that I saw one of his first matches back in about 1997, 1998 for the first promoter I ever worked for. I only was on maybe one or two events with him, but the name always stuck with me because he'd been on shows for ask him next time you see George, ask him if he remembers working for Rocco. And I'm sure he'll have stories for you about Rocco. Anyway, a little sidebar there. So you get talked to about the contract. For those that aren't familiar with MLW, number one, I think you live under a rock that's been pushed into a river, because it's the best hybrid independent company that I've seen in the last 15 years. It's got an old school feel to it, but it has like a mixed martial arts edge to it. It's got believable characterizations. It's got storylines that are linear and episodic. If you're not watching MLW, and we got to tell people how they can do that if they're not doing it, but if you're not watching MLW, please do. If nothing else comes out of the quarantine, the MLW fandom should be something that comes out of the quarantine time. So since you're there, tell people a little bit about the MLW family.
No, literally everything you just said is exactly how I would define it. It's a locker room that's filled to the brim with hungry talent, guys that maybe were told no at that bigger level when they went for a tryout. Guys that have been working their ass off for years, trying to get to that next level. And so the desire and the drive is, you can feel it through the room. Every single guy there is there to work and there to get better and to do the very best that they can, because they're still working their way to that next level. And that in itself is a motivation to make the individual better, because you're only ever as good as the guy you're working with. We know that. And so and then you have the blend of vets there as well, who are able to guide and direct and like you said, that old school feel. Is because these guys are translating. They're not trying to stop what's happening. They're trying to make it translate into what was great about the old school storytelling. They're mixing it into today's wrestling, and that's why you're getting such a great product, because the stories are there and the characters are there, and then you're also getting the in-ring work. And you're getting guys with the mixed martial arts background. You're getting the luchadors. You're getting the guys from Japan. You're getting the American wrestlers, the brawlers. The dynamic is insane, because there's so many different styles in the same place.
One thing that I find really interesting about Court Bauer's initiative and the team at MLW is they seem very focused on expanding international markets and having rights fees and all of that with the international market. And it's the first time I've ever seen an independent company be so focused on becoming a global brand. Obviously, you see that with WWE, you see it with AEW. Ring of Honor in different iterations has tried and fallen a little bit short of it. But MLW, I think, has cornered the market on being able to take a small brand and bring it worldwide based on quality alone. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree, and I think that's what they're doing that's very smart, is they are targeting those those overseas opportunities, because they're going to places that maybe they're probably only able to see the WWE. That's all they have. They may not even have independent wrestling local that they could see. So in targeting those markets, this is giving them something new, something fresh to watch. And the more eyes you have on it, the more eyes we have on us, and they know that. And I think Court Bauer is, he's such an approachable person. He has such amazing ideas. I've had a few conversations with him, and being able for him to be always there. If you have a question or if he has an idea, he's trying to build all of us. While he's doing this, because he knows that that's just going to make the product better. And I thought that was very awesome when I got started, that he was so hands-on with each individual within the company and helping it grow. And even the people backstage, the guys that are the producers, they're able to look and see your character in a way that we're not always able to see it, because we're it's when that's just coming from me, I can only see it from my perspective. But when somebody else is able to stand there and tell me, hey, what if it was like this, or what if it looked like this, and you got people bouncing ideas from one to the next, it just gets better, because it's always going to be better when you have a group of people working in unison on it.
So for folks that haven't seen Major League Wrestling, how do they go about seeing it? I know you can get it on the YouTube channel. They have all 100-plus episodes there. And then there's is it beIN Sports Network? I think that's
beIN
right.
Sports Network. Yep, I think you can get it DirecTV and Dish Network, I know, carry it. I believe PlayStation View carries it. And then, of course, like you said, the YouTube channel, the replays happen almost immediately on the YouTube channel after they air live. And so in the entire library from start to finish is there. So like you said, there's nothing more to do in this quarantine than watch wrestling now anyway. So now would be the perfect opportunity for someone interested to start and literally go through what is storylines, and captivating stories that lead us all the way up to where we are now.
And what's interesting is this is the second time around for Major League Wrestling. A lot of people aren't aware. They ran from, I believe it was 2002 to 2004 or 5, just as a independent company running standalone programming, and then came back years later on the benefit of, oddly enough, the MLW Podcasting Network, which is where guys like Bruce Pritchard started out. Jim Cornette was there for a while. And it's really interesting because had the advent of podcasting not become as fundamental as it is to pro wrestling today, I wonder if MLW would have relaunched.
Yeah, I don't know, and I think Court has had done podcasts where he talked about, because I don't think it was something he ever really thought about doing until maybe the year before it started back up, when interest kind of peaked about it again. And so I'm not really 100% sure on the story of how it got started back up, other than people started talking again, and I think some opportunities come up that with the beIN Sports time slot, which is what ultimately pushed it back into existence. Super thankful that it did, because like I said, and it's fun because, like you said, you talk about people who haven't heard of MLW. I remember when they made the announcement and I put it out on social media, how many people didn't know what MLW was, didn't have a clue. But at the same time, all of a sudden, you have a whole bunch of people who have never heard of this that say, oh, I'm going to check this out. And in the Southeast, and especially in Georgia, so many people didn't have a clue. They'd never heard of it. And especially fans, and even workers who had no clue what MLW was. And so now, because of that, you've got new eyes on the product. You've got new talent who are interested in seeing what this is and looking for an opportunity to be there.
So I've got two more topics I want to discuss, and then we'll wrap up for today. The first thing I want to discuss is take our listeners through your MLW journey. What have you been up to since getting to MLW, and what are you in the middle of now?
I was brought in as a part of the dynasty. Unfortunately, I was brought in, and I was kind of just brought in as their, do boy. I wasn't really being used for anything other than what they wanted me to do, and it didn't include me being in the ring a lot. So that led me to being introduced to Mance Warner. Me and Mancer drank some beers, had a talk, and at the time they had renamed me, and I wasn't even known as Logan Creed. Afterwards, I come back as Logan Creed, and now that I've been set loose from their hold, the next step is going after the dynasty.
And for those unfamiliar, let's educate them as to who the dynasty is.
The dynasty is MJF, who is now in AEW, I'm sorry, and Hammerstone, Holiday.
And so, I think the entire wrestling world is familiar with MJF right now. And if you're not, I don't think you have a pulse. From what I can tell, he has an ego large enough to need its own carry-on bag when he flies, but he backs it up. And at the end of the day, if you can back it up and you get her done, very few can complain about what you're doing. But how foolish must the dynasty have been to take a guy who's 6'10" and say, go sit in a corner and wear a dunce cap? It doesn't seem like intelligent planning at the very least. And Mance Warner.
People like that.
What's that?
Like them. I said, guys like that, everything's a commodity. When you've got everything in the world, nothing seems important. Everything's disposable. So, but in time, I plan to show them that was a mistake.
So educate people to the species that is Mance Warner. I've watched the guy. He's talented. He's double tough. He's in need of a dentist. He's an interesting take, but educate us as to what and who Mance Warner is and how he has influenced your journey in MLW.
Mance Warner is literally a wrestler who stepped out of the 80s into 2020 and has been set loose on the world of wrestling. I think that's the best way that I could describe what Mance Warner is, including the fact that he enjoys drinking beer a whole lot, and fighting is like breathing to him. I'm pretty sure they're one and the same. And
I get the sense just from the interactions, and for those that want to get to know Mance a little bit more in a non-bell-to-bell way, if you subscribe to the High Spots Network, and for $9.99, and you're getting actual wrestling where they can say the words pro wrestling on it, unlike WWE, he's done some interview level shows there where he shows a level and depth of character, which is really unique, and he's very relatable. I say he's Hillbilly Jim met the Briscoes, meaning the ROH Briscoes, not Jack and Jerry, and a little bit of like a Steve Austin double tough thrown in there all into one. He's a really interesting cat, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in that MLW brings characters out of its talent.
Yep, absolutely, and that's exactly everybody that you just kind of combined to make Mance Warner would be a perfect description of who he is. But yeah, no, they do. They bring out the character in everybody that's there.
And I want to close on probably the highest of notes, and then I'll let you plug anything that you'd like to plug. The note I want to close on is you mentioned earlier working on a movie, and then I happened to wander by Court Bauer's Twitter, and sure enough, he was mentioning you being involved in a film-related project. Can we educate people to that?
Yeah, it's part of a Dead by Midnight series. Dead by Midnight series is very similar to, if you remember, years and years ago, Tales from the Crypt.
Okay.
There were three short stories in one to make a movie. Very similar to that. I think there's 4, either 5 movies in the Dead by Midnight series, part 2, which is what this will be. And in the film, I played Gut Cruncher, which is what the film is named. Not sure how much I can talk about it, so I don't want to get in trouble. But I do know it was planning to be released in May. With the current situation in the world, I'm not sure if that's still a go. But it will be released at some point this year. And there will be a premiere at the Atlanta Film Festival in Atlanta, Georgia for it. And then from there, I believe it's supposed to be streaming on Shudder and also Netflix and maybe a few other outlets in time as they work out those deals. But yeah, no, that was my first experience in the film industry. Fortunately, the character I was playing was just throwing and eating people, so not too far off from what I do on a weekly basis. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a super fun experience. I learned a lot, and I'm really looking. I'm looking at other opportunities already in the film industry. I'm talking with some people now, and so that may be something that we see more of in the future.
Can you compare the professional wrestling industry and the film industry in terms of demands on the body and the mind?
Well, wrestling is definitely more demanding of the body. Mind-wise, I think it'd probably be comparable. It's probably the same. It's the biggest difference is in wrestling. There's no second chance when you're in front of the live camera. Fortunately, in the film industry, we can do it as many times as we need to.
All right, and as we close this off, and I'll get in touch with you when we close, and we can follow up because I have some questions for you off air. But anyhow, I'm gonna have fun with one question here, and then I'll let you close however you'd like to. Let's suppose we gave you a magic wand, and with the magic wand you can have 2 matches. One with somebody who's still alive that you've never wrestled before, and one with somebody who's passed away that you've never had the chance to wrestle. Who are they and why?
Mike Awesome would be the one who's passed away. Just because he was somebody that I watched to learn from. I've even said that he was a mentor that I'll never get to meet because I didn't just watch it. I studied him because we were so similar in size, and it was funny because Court Bauer even made that comparison when we met. That I reminded him of Mike, and so that would be. I think that would definitely be the match that I would have with someone who passed away. As far as the live goes, to pick one, probably The Undertaker. I think if I had to pick one, that would be The Undertaker.
What I saw, and this is just, and I'd love for fans maybe. If you're listening to this and you go check out Logan and you have seen him for the first time, I'd love for you in the comments to this YouTube video, let us know what mainstream wrestler from days gone by you think of when you first see him, because he mentions Mike Awesome, and I had a completely different impression. First time I saw you, the first thing I thought was Sid if he was coordinated. You've got that look, you've got that power, but you have more fluidity to your movement than Sid ever did, but you have that aura.
That comparison has been made before as well with many people. And that's also, Sid is also another that, I've often said amongst friends, could you imagine if he had actually wanted to, to really wanted to be at the top, and been dead? Because, I don't think his mind was always in it. It was more or less just a way to make money. And I think that he's been on record to say that was what he was doing it for. But that definitely, everything. I loved his promos. A lot of people, will trash promos that Sid did, but if you watch some of his early stuff, WWF, his promos were when he would whisper, when he would almost whisper to the camera, you were just brought in. He would bring you in so close to what he was saying. And I felt like that was such a cool thing, because a lot of times, and I've heard it told to me now, you don't have to yell to get your point across. Sometimes just saying it softly and slowly is way more intimidating than yelling about it. And I think
Jake Roberts is proving that now on AEW every week.
He is, and I mean that is such a huge point that is made, because it's true. Nothing's more intimidating than someone that could literally snap you in half, talking to you in a very calm way about how they're going to break you in half.
Yeah, and so actually one more question that came as we were going through this, because I was picturing, I was like, if I could take you and flunk you anywhere into any territory, what would I do? And I'd say, well, I was thinking the first iteration of MLW, and imagine if the late great Gary Hart was able to manage and guide Logan Creed.
It's so funny, because I am about to start reading his book. So that's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm actually looking forward to getting into that and really learning about him.
Well, and I know that I watched a bit of his shoot interview the other day. It's on my to finish list. Highspots.com has it if you're interested. You would learn so much from him, and I'm sure if you talk to Court, and from what I understand, Court mentored under Gary before Gary's untimely passing. But I just, you need, from the way you carry yourself, you need that cerebral manager, and Gary Hart would have been that for you.
No, that would have been such an honor to be able to work with him. And I've had managers in the past, and for a few years, my wife was even a valet, but also a manager. She was almost a voice piece for me. And then the last year or so, people finally started letting me talk, and quickly a lot of people learned that, oh wait, he actually can talk on the mic. So they kind of stepped away from doing that and putting a manager with me, because when they realized that I had a voice and I could handle myself on the microphone, that I no longer needed that. But no, I would absolutely jump at the opportunity if Gary was still with us to work with him and do that.
Awesome. Okay, and we raised Gary Hart because if you go back into the early days, the original iteration of MLW, some of Gary Hart's stuff with Low Key and other very early parts of the MLW thing, definitely worth going and checking out. if I would even say this, if there's one company you're going to check out in 2020 that you haven't already, Major League Wrestling should be it. But, Logan, why don't we tie up? Do you have any plugs you want to put out? How can people get in contact with you if they want to? Do you have merchandise that you can send folks? What do people need to know as we close?
Follow me, please, on all of the social media outlets at the Logan Creed on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Of course, right now there's not really any shows to plug, unfortunately, but if you want to see me in action, Independent Wrestling TV, PWX, Southern Honor, watch both of those shows, both excellent shows in the entire library. The entire first year of Southern Honor Wrestling is on there. Definitely worth watching start to finish. Some of the best shows that you can see put on an independent level as far as production value. And then, of course, MLW streaming every week on YouTube and BN Sports. But, yeah, and merchandise-wise, you can send me a message to any of those outlets, Twitter, Facebook. I do have merchandise that I sell. I sell it myself. I don't have a site for it. And but yeah, thank you for the support. Thank you for the interview. I enjoyed it.
It was a good time, and we will close there. For people that are interested, there will be daily content. Check out Pro Wrestling Logic on YouTube each day. This has been Scott Gikden. Keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.